The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Dr. James Harper's cluttered office at the university. Papers covered every surface, and dusty artifacts from past digs lined the bookshelves. He ran his hand through his graying hair and glanced at the clock. Almost 6. Another day spent grading papers instead of being in the field where he belonged. A knock at the door broke his concentration. "Package for you, Dr. Harper," said the department secretary, placing a small brown envelope on the corner of his desk. "Thanks, Diane," he said, barely looking up from the student essay he was marking. The envelope had no return address, just his name written in neat, precise handwriting. Odd. Most of his mail came through the university system with proper labeling. He set aside the half-graded paper and picked up the envelope, turning it over in his hands. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, like it contained something more substantial than paper. Harper opened the drawer where he kept his letter opener, a small bronze Egyptian knife, a gift from his mentor 20 years ago. He carefully sliced, opened the top of the envelope and tipped the contents onto his desk. Several fragments of ancient papyrus slid out, along with a folded note on modern paper. The papyrus pieces were delicate, yellowed with age, and covered in hieroglyphics that looked authentic at first glance. Harper's heart rate quickened as he gently spread them out with his fingertips. "What do we have here?" he whispered to himself, reaching for his magnifying glass. The hieroglyphics were crisp and well-preserved. Too well-preserved? Harper had worked with enough forgeries to be suspicious of anything that appeared at his door without explanation. He studied the symbols carefully, translating in his head. Hidden chamber, royal advisor, Western Valley, secret knowledge. The text described a previously unknown tomb located in an unexplored section near Luxor, allegedly belonging to a royal advisor who had served 3 pharaohs. According to these fragments, this advisor had possessed knowledge that was deemed too dangerous to be shared widely, something about stars and metal that speaks. Harper unfolded the note that had accompanied the papyrus. It contained only map coordinates and 2 words: "Come alone." He sat back in his chair, chewing absently on the end of his pen. In his 30 years as an archaeologist, he'd received his share of tips and leads, most turning out to be hoaxes or misidentified sites already documented. But something about these fragments felt different. The hieroglyphics used certain rare forms that weren't commonly known outside academic circles, and the writing style matched the late period he specialized in. Harper pulled out his laptop and entered the coordinates into a mapping program. The location was indeed near Luxor, but in a rocky area between known excavation sites, a gap in the archaeological record that had always puzzled him. Could it really be? He murmured, excitement building despite his professional skepticism. Across the street from Harper's university building, a figure sat in a parked car. Through the windshield, they had a clear view of Harper's office window on the 3rd floor. The figure watched as Harper's silhouette moved back and forth behind the glass, clearly agitated or excited by what he'd found in the envelope. The watcher smiled slightly and made a note on a small pad. Phase 1 complete. The fish had taken the bait. Back in his office, Harper had already pulled 3 reference books from his shelves and was cross-checking the symbols on the papyrus. After an hour of careful analysis, he was becoming convinced of their authenticity. The text referenced astronomical alignments that would have been meaningful to ancient Egyptians, but weren't widely documented in popular literature. He reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Tom? It's James. I need to cancel my lectures for next week." He paused, listening to the department head's protests. "Yes, I know it's short notice. Family emergency. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." The lie felt uncomfortable on his lips, but he couldn't risk word getting out about a potential discovery. The archaeological community was small and competitive. If this tomb was real, he wanted first access. After ending the call, Harper opened his laptop again and booked the next available flight to Cairo. He'd need to arrange for local transportation to Luxor, supplies, maybe hire a guide who knew the terrain. His mind raced with preparations. As darkness fell outside his window, Harper carefully placed the papyrus fragments in an acid-free folder and locked them in his desk drawer. He'd take them with him tomorrow to study on the flight. For now, he needed to go home and pack. Across the street, the watcher observed Harper turning off his office light and leaving the building with quick, purposeful strides. The figure started their car engine and followed at a discreet distance as Harper drove to his modest apartment building on the edge of campus. Harper lived alone since his divorce 5 years ago. His ex-wife had grown tired of competing with ancient civilizations for his attention. Tonight, the solitude suited him perfectly. No one to question why he was frantically packing or voice concern about him rushing off to Egypt based on an anonymous tip. He threw clothes into a suitcase, without much thought for what he was bringing. His field kit was always ready: trowels, brushes, measuring tools, and his camera equipment. He added his laptop, reference books, and a satellite phone. The desert beyond Luxor had spotty cell coverage at best. After packing, Harper poured himself a small glass of whiskey and sat by his living room window, looking out at the quiet street below. Excitement and doubt battled in his mind. Was he being foolish? Chasing a hoax when he should be preparing for next week's lectures? No. His instincts told him this was real. In 3 decades of fieldwork, he'd developed a sense for genuine discoveries. The papyrus fragments had that feel, the subtle details that forgers typically missed. What truly intrigued him was the mention of knowledge deemed too dangerous. Ancient Egyptian advisors were known to be powerful figures, sometimes even more influential than the pharaohs they served. They were keepers of religious, astronomical, and mathematical knowledge. What could this particular advisor have known that warranted special treatment of his tomb? Harper finished his whiskey and checked his watch. His flight left at 7 a.m. He should try to sleep, though he doubted he'd be able to with his mind racing like this. Outside, parked now at the end of Harper's Street, the watcher made another note in their small pad. The archaeologist was moving, faster than expected. Good. Urgency would make him less cautious, more likely to follow the trail exactly as laid out. The watcher started their car again and drove away, already planning the next phase. Harper woke before his alarm, having slept fitfully. Dreams of narrow passageways and strange symbols had filled his few hours of rest. He showered quickly, double-checked his packing, and called a taxi to the airport. As the taxi pulled away from his apartment building, Harper didn't notice the car that had been parked across the street all night, nor did he see the figure inside taking photographs of him leaving. At the airport, Harper moved through security and found his gate. While waiting to board, he couldn't resist pulling out the folder with the papyrus fragments for one more look. Something about the writing style nagged at him. It was authentic to the period, yet slightly different from standard royal inscriptions he'd studied. He was so absorbed in the fragments that he barely registered the final boarding call for his flight. Tucking the folder carefully into his carry-on, he joined the line of passengers and soon found himself settling into his seat for the long journey to Cairo. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Harper gazed out the window at the city below. For the first time in years, he felt the pure thrill of discovery that had drawn him to archaeology as a young man. Whatever waited for him in the desert near Luxor, hoax or genuine find, at least he was following his passion again, not just teaching others about it. The plane lifted off, carrying Harper toward Egypt and the mysterious tomb, and toward the watcher who had already arrived in Luxor 2 days earlier, preparing for the archaeologist's arrival and the next stage of a plan years in the making. The watcher stood on a hotel balcony overlooking the Nile, speaking quietly into a phone. He's on his way. Everything is proceeding as planned. After listening briefly to the person on the other end, the watcher added, "No, he suspects nothing. The tomb will be ready when he arrives." The sun set over the ancient city, casting golden light across ruins that had stood for thousands of years. Soon, if all went according to plan, Dr. James Harper would uncover a secret that had been waiting in darkness all this time. A secret someone had gone to great lengths to ensure he, specifically, would find. The desert heat hit Harper like a wall as he stepped off the small plane that had carried him from Cairo to Luxor. Sweat immediately beaded on his forehead as he squinted against the blinding sunlight. After 30 hours of travel, he was exhausted but too wired with anticipation to feel it. He collected his luggage and equipment cases, then made his way through the small airport to find a taxi. The driver, an older man with deeply tanned skin and a friendly smile, helped load Harper's gear into the trunk. "Where to, sir?" the driver asked in accented English. "Downtown Luxor, please. I need to find a guide." As the taxi wound through the busy streets, Harper leaned back against the worn leather seat and watched the mix of ancient and modern that defined Luxor. Towering temples and ruins stood alongside internet cafes and tourist shops. He'd been here many times before, but this visit felt different, urgent and somehow more personal. The driver dropped him at a small hotel he'd stayed at on previous digs. The owner, Fadi, greeted him with a handshake and genuine smile. "Dr. Harper, it has been too long. Another discovery to chase?" Harper smiled back. "Something like that, Fadi. I need a good guide who knows the Western Valley area well. Someone who can keep quiet about where we're going." Fadi's expression grew thoughtful. "I know just the person. My nephew Hassan. Very reliable, very discreet. He has worked with archaeologists before." "Perfect. Can you arrange a meeting for tomorrow morning? I need to rest tonight." Of course, I will call him now." In his simple room, Harper spread the papyrus fragments on the small desk by the window. The long journey had given him time to translate more of the text. The tomb allegedly belonged to a man named Amenhotep, advisor to 3 pharaohs during the 18th dynasty. What made this unusual was that advisors rarely served multiple rulers. Pharaohs typically replaced the previous ruler's inner circle with their own trusted people. This Amenhotep must have been extraordinarily valuable. But why? And why was his tomb supposedly hidden away from the Valley of the Kings, where royal advisors were typically buried? A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Dr. Harper?" "I brought you some tea," Fadi called through the door. Harper quickly covered the fragments with a notebook before opening the door. "Thank you, Fadi. Any word from your nephew?" "Yes. Hassan will meet you here at 7 a.m. He says he knows the area you mentioned very well." After Fadi left, Harper sipped the strong, sweet tea and looked out his window at the Nile River flowing peacefully in the distance. Tomorrow he would begin the search for a tomb that, if real, could change our understanding of ancient Egyptian knowledge. He didn't notice the figure watching his window from a cafe across the street, nor did he see them speaking quietly into a phone while never taking their eyes off his hotel. The next morning, Harper met Hassan in the hotel lobby. The guide was younger than Harper expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with intelligent eyes and a quiet confidence. "Dr. Harper, I am Hassan. My uncle says you need someone who knows the Western Valley." They shook hands. "Yes, I'm looking for a specific location, rather off the beaten path." Hassan nodded. "I can take you wherever you need to go. When do you want to leave? Can we get supplies and head out today? I'd like to make camp near the site by nightfall." "Of course. I have a truck. We can buy water and food, then leave within 2 hours." While Hassan went to prepare the truck, Harper gathered his equipment. He carefully packed the papyrus fragments in a waterproof case along with his most essential tools. Everything else could be replaced if necessary, but those fragments were irreplaceable. By mid-morning, they were driving away from Luxor in Hassan's dusty pickup truck, loaded with camping equipment, food, water, and Harper's archaeological gear. The road quickly gave way to rougher terrain as they headed into the desert west of the Valley of the Kings. "This area has been searched before, you know," Hassan said as they bounced over the uneven ground. "Many archaeologists think there is nothing left to find." Harper smiled slightly. "Sometimes things hide in plain sight. The coordinates I have point to a small wadi between 2 already excavated areas." Hassan looked intrigued but didn't press for details. "Good." Fadi had been right about his discretion. After several hours of increasingly difficult driving, they reached a point where the truck could go no further. Steep, rocky slopes surrounded them on 3 sides with a narrow path leading up into a canyon. "We must go on foot from here," Hassan said, parking in the shade of an overhanging rock. They loaded the essential gear into backpacks and began the climb. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Harper paused several times to drink water and catch his breath. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and the excitement of the chase had made him forget that temporarily. "Are you all right, Dr. Harper?" Hassan asked during one such pause. "Fine, just not 25 anymore," Harper replied with a self-deprecating smile. "How much farther?" Hassan checked the GPS coordinates Harper had given him. "Perhaps another kilometer. There is a small plateau ahead where we can make camp." As they continued climbing, Harper felt a strange sensation, like they were being watched. He turned several times to look back down the path but saw nothing except rocks and dust. "Something wrong?" Hassan asked. After the third time, Harper stopped to look around. "Just thought I heard something," Harper said, not wanting to sound paranoid. Hassan frowned slightly. "The desert plays tricks on your mind sometimes. The wind in the rocks can sound like footsteps or voices." They reached the plateau as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the rocky ground. It was a flat area, perhaps 50 meters across, with good visibility in all directions. Perfect for a camp. While Hassan set up the tent, Harper checked the GPS again. According to his calculations, the tomb entrance, if it existed, should be within 100 meters of their position. He walked the perimeter of the plateau, studying the rock faces carefully in the fading light. Nothing obvious jumped out at him. No carved doorways, no hieroglyphics, no signs of human activity at all. But that didn't mean anything. Many tombs were deliberately hidden, their entrances concealed beneath sand or behind false rock faces. From a ridge half a kilometer away, a figure watched through high-powered binoculars. The observer tracked Harper's methodical movement around the plateau, occasionally speaking quietly into a satellite phone. "They've arrived at the site. He's already searching the perimeter." A pause. "Yes, exactly as predicted. He'll find it tomorrow morning when the light hits the eastern face." Another pause. "No, I don't think he suspects anything." The guide seems unaware as well. The observer lowered the binoculars and moved back from the ridge, disappearing into a small tent camouflaged among the rocks. Back at the camp, Harper and Hassan ate a simple dinner of flatbread, cheese, and dried fruit. "Tomorrow we begin the real search," Harper said, pouring coffee from a thermos. "The entrance, if it exists, will be hidden. We'll need to examine every unusual rock formation, every shadow that doesn't look quite right." Hassan nodded. "I have helped find hidden doorways before. Sometimes the sand and wind cover all traces, but there are always clues if you know what to look for." As darkness fell completely, the desert grew eerily quiet. The only sounds were the occasional gust of wind and the soft crackle of their small camp stove. Harper pulled out his notebook and reviewed his translations once more by the light of a battery-powered lamp. This advisor, Amenhotep, was said to possess knowledge of the stars that went beyond what was typical for his time, Harper explained, feeling the need to share at least some information with his guide. The fragments mention metal that speaks, and pathways through the sky. Poetic language, perhaps, but intriguing. Hassan looked thoughtful. "My grandfather used to tell stories about ancient Egyptians who could read messages from the stars. Most archaeologists dismiss such tales as folklore." "Most archaeological breakthroughs begin with folklore," Harper replied. "People rarely make up stories from nothing. There's usually some kernel of truth, however distorted by time." Later that night, after Hassan had gone to sleep in the tent, Harper sat outside looking up at the brilliant canopy of stars. The Milky Way stretched across the sky in a magnificent band of light, clearer here than anywhere else he'd ever been. Had Amenhotep looked at these same stars and seen something his contemporaries missed? Had he possessed astronomical knowledge that somehow threatened the established order of his time? Harper finally crawled into his sleeping bag around midnight, his mind still racing with questions. Just before drifting off to sleep, he again felt that nagging sensation of being watched. He dismissed it as desert paranoia and closed his eyes. On the distant ridge, the observer's night vision equipment clearly showed the camp going dark as both men retired for the night. The watchers settled in for a long vigil, patient and prepared. Tomorrow would be the critical day, when Dr. James Harper would find exactly what had been prepared for him to discover. Harper woke before dawn, his body still on university time despite the exhaustion of travel. He unzipped the tent flap quietly, trying not to wake Hassan, and stepped out into the cool desert morning. The stars were still visible overhead, though fading as the eastern horizon began to lighten. He made coffee on the small camp stove and sat on a flat rock, watching the landscape slowly reveal itself in the growing light. This was his favorite time on any dig, the quiet moments before the day's work began, full of possibility. As the sun crested the distant mountains, its first rays struck the cliff face about 50 meters from their camp. Something flashed briefly, a reflection where there shouldn't be one. Harper set down his coffee cup and stood, eyes fixed on the spot. "Hassan," he called, not taking his eyes off the cliff. "I think I found something." The guide emerged from the tent, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What is it?" "Look there," Harper pointed. "When the sunlight hits that section of rock, something reflects. Natural minerals don't reflect light quite like that." They approached the cliff face together. Up close, it looked like any other section of weathered limestone, but Harper ran his fingers carefully over the surface, searching for irregularities. "Here," he said suddenly. "Feel this." Hassan placed his hand where Harper indicated. What appeared to be random erosion was actually a series of small, deliberately carved symbols, almost completely worn away by centuries of wind and sand. "These are man-made," Hassan agreed, tracing the barely perceptible patterns. "Very old and very weathered." Harper pulled out a small brush from his pocket and gently swept away decades of accumulated dust from the rock face. More symbols appeared, hieroglyphics, that matched those on the papyrus fragments. "This is it," he whispered, excitement making his voice shake slightly. "This has to be the entrance." For the next hour, they carefully cleaned the rock face, revealing a carved doorway that had been filled in with stones and covered with a thin layer of rock dust, mixed with some kind of ancient cement to disguise it. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. From even a few feet away, it was nearly impossible to distinguish from the natural cliff. "They really didn't want anyone finding this place," Hassan remarked, stepping back to look at their discovery. Harper nodded, taking photographs of the hieroglyphics now visible around the edges of the false door. The text mentions that Amenhotep's knowledge was to be hidden from those unworthy and preserved for a time when the stars align once more. They returned to camp for tools, and by mid-morning, they had cleared enough of the entrance to reveal a narrow passageway leading into darkness. Harper set up lights on stands to illuminate the entrance and prepared his documentation equipment. "I'll go in first," he told Hassan. "Standard procedure for an initial survey." Hassan looked concerned. "Be careful. These old tombs, sometimes, have traps or unstable areas." Harper smiled reassuringly. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I know all the signs to watch for." He strapped on a headlamp, checked his camera, and carefully entered the passage. The air inside was surprisingly cool and dry, perfect conditions for preservation. The tunnel descended at a gentle angle, with smooth walls bearing traces of painted scenes, though most had faded to mere outlines. After about 20 meters, the passage opened into a small antechamber. Harper swept his light across the walls and his breath caught in his throat. Unlike the faded paintings in the tunnel, these wall decorations were remarkably well preserved. They depicted a man, presumably Amenhotep, standing beneath a night sky filled with stars and what appeared to be planets, but something was odd about the astronomical depictions. They showed configurations that didn't match any known ancient Egyptian star charts, and there were strange symbols interspersed among the familiar hieroglyphics, symbols that looked almost like equations. Harper moved closer to one wall, photographing every section methodically. The paintings showed Amenhotep receiving knowledge, from figures that were depicted with unusually detailed star patterns on their clothing. In one scene, he was shown holding what appeared to be a metal disc, inscribed with concentric circles and unfamiliar symbols. "Hassan, you need to see this," he called toward the entrance. The guide appeared in the doorway a moment later. "What have you found?" "I'm not sure yet, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen in an Egyptian tomb. The astronomical details are incredibly precise." Harper continued his survey of the antechamber, finding a sealed doorway on the far wall. More hieroglyphics surrounded it, warning of consequences for disturbing the sacred knowledge within. "We'll need to document everything in this room before going further," Harper explained. "Every symbol, every painting. This could take days to properly record." They worked together through the afternoon, Harper photographing and making notes while Hassan helped with measurements and lighting. The unusual symbols became more frequent near the sealed inner door, intermingling with traditional hieroglyphics in a way that suggested they were meant to be read together. It's like they developed a specialized written language just for recording this particular knowledge, Harper mused, comparing the symbols to his reference materials. Some of these match astronomical notations from much later periods. How could they have known? His voice trailed off as he noticed something else. The metal disc shown in the paintings appeared in multiple scenes, and in each one it was depicted with slightly different markings, as if recording changes over time. "I think this might be some kind of astronomical calculating device," he said, pointing to the images. "Something like an ancient computer for tracking celestial movements." Hassan looked skeptical. "A computer? That seems not a computer like we have today," Harper clarified, "but a sophisticated mechanical device for calculations. The ancient Greeks had the Antikythera mechanism. This might be something similar, but potentially much older." As evening approached, they reluctantly left the tomb to return to camp. Harper was too excited to eat much dinner, instead poring over his photographs and notes by lamplight. "Tomorrow we'll open the inner chamber," he told Hassan. "I need to check the structural integrity first to make sure it's safe, but if these antechamber paintings are any indication, what's inside could be revolutionary." Later that night, after Hassan had gone to sleep, Harper sat alone by the dying embers of their small fire. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Twice during the day he thought he'd heard sounds from further down the canyon, small rock slides that could have been caused by someone moving around. He scanned the surrounding ridges, but saw nothing in the moonlight. Still, decades of fieldwork had taught him to trust his instincts. Someone else was out there, and they were interested in what he was finding. Harper decided to set a small trap. He gathered some of their empty food wrappers and equipment cases and arranged them carefully around the perimeter of the camp. If anyone approached during the night, they would have to move these items to get close. Satisfied with his precaution, he finally went to bed, though sleep came fitfully. When he awoke the next morning, his first act was to check the items he'd arranged. Several had been moved, subtly, but definitely not in the positions he'd left them. Someone had been in their camp while they slept. He said nothing to Hassan, not wanting to alarm the guide unnecessarily. Instead, he casually surveyed the area while they had breakfast, looking for any signs of their visitor. Near the path that led back down to where they'd left the truck, he found a single footprint in a patch of sand, a boot print that matched neither his shoes nor Hassan's. Back on the distant ridge, the observer watched through binoculars as Harper discovered the intentionally left footprint. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The archaeologist was now aware of being watched but had no idea why or by whom. That uncertainty would make him more cautious, more thorough in his documentation, which was precisely what was needed. The watcher spoke quietly into a satellite phone. "He's found the antechamber and will open the inner chamber today. Yes, he noticed the astronomical anomalies immediately. Very astute, just as we expected. And he's aware of surveillance now. The footprint was discovered." A pause as the person on the other end spoke. "No, I don't think we need to interfere yet. Let him proceed with the discovery. The real test will be his reaction to what's in the inner chamber." As Harper and Hassan prepared to return to the tomb, neither was aware that the true purpose of this elaborate setup was just beginning to unfold, or that the artifacts they were about to discover would challenge everything modern archaeology thought it knew about ancient civilizations. Harper stood before the sealed inner doorway, his heart pounding with anticipation. The stone slab blocking the entrance was carved with warnings and symbols more complex than those in the antechamber. After carefully documenting every marking, he turned to Hassan. "Ready to make history?" he asked, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. Hassan nodded, looking both nervous and eager. "How do we open it without causing damage?" "The Egyptians typically designed these doors to be removed in a specific way," Harper explained, pointing to nearly invisible seams along the edges. "See these? The slab should slide upward into a groove in the ceiling." They set up a system of ropes and pulleys anchored to the sturdy walls of the antechamber. With both men pulling together, the stone door gradually slid upward, releasing a soft whoosh of air that had been sealed inside for thousands of years. Harper paused, holding his breath. Many tombs released dangerous fungal spores when first opened. After a minute with no ill effects, he shone his light into the darkness beyond the doorway. "My God," he whispered. Unlike the modest antechamber, the inner room was vast, at least 10 meters square with a high ceiling. The beam of his headlamp couldn't reach the far corners, but what immediately caught his attention were the objects in the center of the room. A large stone table held what appeared to be metal devices of various shapes and sizes. Not bronze or copper, which would have tarnished over the centuries, but something that still gleamed in the artificial light. Around the wall stood wooden shelves holding dozens of scrolls and strange crystalline objects. "This isn't possible," Harper murmured, stepping cautiously into the chamber. "Metal shouldn't look like this after thousands of years." Hassan remained in the doorway, eyes wide. "What is all this?" "I have no idea," Harper admitted. "But whatever it is, it's rewriting everything we know about ancient Egyptian technology." He approached the central table, camera in hand, documenting everything before touching anything. The metal objects were unlike any ancient artifacts he'd ever seen. One appeared to be a disc similar to the one depicted in the wall paintings, about the size of a dinner plate with concentric rings that could be rotated around a central axis. Another looked like a tube with glass-like elements at both ends. "This resembles a telescope," he said incredulously, carefully photographing it from all angles. But the ancient Egyptians weren't supposed to have optical technology like this. The walls of the chamber were covered in the same mixture of hieroglyphics and unusual symbols seen in the antechamber, but here they were more elaborate, forming complex diagrams and what looked like mathematical equations. "These appear to be star charts," Harper said, examining one section of wall. "But they show star systems that weren't discovered until the modern era. How could they possibly know about these?" He moved to the shelves and carefully examined the scrolls. Unlike typical papyrus, these were made of a thin, leather-like material that had somehow resisted decay. The writing on them matched the unusual symbols on the walls. "I need to get some of these back to the university for proper analysis," he said, more to himself than to Hassan. "The implications of this find are staggering." After several hours of careful documentation, Harper had filled the memory cards on both his cameras and filled dozens of pages in his notebook. Yet he felt he had barely scratched the surface of what this chamber contained. "We should head back to camp," Hassan suggested. "It's getting late and you've been working nonstop." Harper nodded reluctantly. "You're right. Let's secure the entrance and continue tomorrow." As they prepared to leave, Harper carefully selected 3 small artifacts to take back to camp for closer examination: the disc-like device, a scroll with particularly interesting markings, and a small crystal object that seemed to change color depending on the angle of light. They sealed the tomb entrance with a tarp to keep out wind-blown sand and returned to their camp as the sun was setting. Harper was so absorbed in thoughts about his discoveries that he almost forgot about their mysterious watcher, until Hassan grabbed his arm suddenly. "Someone has been here," the guide said in a low voice, pointing to their tent. The entrance flap was partially open, though Harper was certain they had closed it completely. Inside, nothing appeared to be missing, but their belongings had been subtly rearranged. Harper's spare notebook lay open to a page of his notes about the papyrus fragments, though he was sure he had closed it. They're looking for something specific, Harper said grimly. They know about the tomb. Hassan looked around nervously. Should we leave? Go back to Luxor? Harper shook his head. No. Whatever is in that tomb has been hidden for thousands of years. I'm not abandoning it now that we've found it. But we need to be more careful. He didn't mention the artifacts he'd brought back, which were safely tucked in his jacket pockets. That night, they took turns keeping watch. During his shift, Harper examined the disc-like object by the light of a small, covered flashlight. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. The concentric rings moved with precision around the central axis, and tiny markings along each ring corresponded to astronomical symbols. When aligned in certain ways, small holes in the outer rings lined up with markings on inner rings. Harper realized it was some kind of calculating device, perhaps for predicting celestial events or tracking star movements. This is thousands of years ahead of anything they should have had, he whispered to himself, turning the device over in his hands. The underside bore an inscription in the strange hybrid language. Harper could only make out parts of it. When the 3 stars align, the way will open, knowledge returns from the sky. During Hassan's watch, Harper tried to sleep, but found his mind racing with questions. How had an Egyptian royal advisor from the 18th dynasty possessed knowledge of star systems that weren't discovered until the telescope was invented? Who had created these metal objects that showed no signs of corrosion after thousands of years? And who had sent him the papyrus fragments that led him here? He was just drifting off to sleep when a shout from Hassan jolted him awake. "Dr. Harper, come quickly." Harper scrambled out of the tent to find Hassan pointing down the path that led from their plateau. In the moonlight, a figure was rapidly disappearing around a bend in the trail. "I saw someone watching us," Hassan explained breathlessly. "When I called out, they ran." Harper grabbed a flashlight. "Stay here and guard the camp. I'm going after them." Before Hassan could protest, Harper was racing down the path following the retreating figure. The footing was treacherous in the dark, and several times he nearly lost his balance on the rocky slope. The mysterious watcher was quick and seemed to know the terrain well, always staying just ahead of him. After several minutes of pursuit, Harper rounded a sharp bend and found himself in a small box canyon. The figure was nowhere to be seen, though there was nowhere they could have gone. The walls were too steep to climb without equipment. Breathing hard, Harper swept his flashlight across the canyon floor and walls. His beam caught something white. Against the dark rocks, a piece of paper weighed down with a small stone. He approached cautiously and picked it up. It was a note, written in the same precise handwriting as the one that had accompanied the papyrus fragments. "You're asking the right questions, Dr. Harper. Not all knowledge was lost. Some was hidden until humanity was ready. Be careful who you trust with what you found." Harper stared at the note, a chill running down his spine despite the warm night air. The Watcher had led him here deliberately to deliver this message, but why? And what did it mean about knowledge being hidden until humanity was ready? He made his way back to camp, finding a worried Hassan waiting for him. "Did you catch them?" the guide asked. "No," Harper replied, deciding to keep the note to himself for now. They knew the terrain too well, but I think they're more interested in what we're finding than in harming us. That night, as Hassan slept, Harper examined the crystal object he'd taken from the tomb. In the dim light of his covered flashlight, it seemed to glow from within, changing from blue to green to a deep purple as he turned it in his hands. It was warm to the touch, warmer than it should be from just being held. And when he placed it near the metal disc, the markings on the disc seemed to shift subtly, as if responding to the crystal's presence. "What were you hiding, Amenhotep?" Harper whispered. "And from whom?" On the ridge above, the Watcher observed Harper through night vision. Binoculars, noting his examination of the artifacts, everything was proceeding as planned. Tomorrow would be the true test, when Harper discovered the chamber's final secret. The Watcher spoke quietly into a satellite phone. "He's taken the calibration disc and one of the crystals, just as expected. Yes, he's beginning to make the connections." Tomorrow I'll make contact if necessary, but I think he'll find the hidden chamber on his own. He's quite perceptive. Harper finally fell asleep with the crystal and disc beside him, unaware that the greatest revelation still waited in a concealed section of the tomb, a truth that would challenge not just archaeological understanding, but humanity's entire concept of its history and place in the universe. Harper woke with a start, the first rays of dawn streaming through a gap in the tent flap. For a moment, he couldn't remember where the strange metal disc beside his sleeping bag had come from. Then yesterday's discoveries came flooding back, and he sat up quickly. The crystal he'd taken from the tomb was glowing faintly in the dim light, pulsing with a soft rhythm almost like a heartbeat. He picked it up carefully, surprised to find it was now giving off noticeable warmth. Outside, he found Hassan already awake and brewing coffee. "Did you sleep at all?" Harper asked, noticing the dark circles under the guide's eyes. Hassan shook his head. "Not much. I kept thinking about what we found yesterday and about our visitor." He hesitated, then added, "Dr. Harper, my uncle didn't tell me everything, did he? This isn't just another archaeological survey." Harper sighed, deciding it was time for more honesty. "No, it's not. Someone sent me fragments of papyrus that led directly to this tomb. They wanted me specifically to find it." He showed Hassan the note he'd found in the canyon. The guide read it silently, his expression growing more troubled. "What does it mean? Knowledge hidden until humanity was ready?" "I don't know," Harper admitted. "But I intend to find out. There's something important in that tomb, something beyond just historical significance." They ate a quick breakfast, then gathered their equipment and headed back to the tomb entrance. As they walked, Harper felt the crystal in his pocket growing warmer. When they reached the entrance, he pulled it out to examine it. "That's strange," he muttered. "What is it?" Hassan asked. "This crystal. It's reacting to something. It's getting warmer the closer we get to the tomb." Inside the antechamber, the crystal's glow was now visible even in the light from their headlamps. Harper took out the metal disc as well, and noticed that small markings on its surface were now glowing with the same light as the crystal. "They're connected somehow," he said, excitement building in his voice. "Let's get back to the main chamber." In the large inner room, Harper moved slowly around the perimeter, holding the crystal out in front of him. In most areas, its glow remained steady, but when he approached the far corner of the chamber, it pulsed more rapidly and grew almost hot to the touch. "There's something here," he called to Hassan, who was examining some of the scrolls on the shelves. The wall in this corner appeared solid at first glance, decorated with the same hieroglyphics and star charts as the rest of the chamber. But as Harper ran his fingers over the surface, he felt a slight difference in texture in one section. "Help me look for a mechanism," he told Hassan. "There might be a hidden door or compartment." They searched methodically, checking for loose stones or unusual markings. Finally, Harper noticed a small depression in the wall about chest height. It was roughly the same size as the crystal he held. "I wonder," he murmured, and carefully placed the crystal into the depression. It fit perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystal's glow intensified, spreading in thin lines along nearly invisible seams in the wall. With a soft grinding sound, a section of the wall about a meter square slid inward, then moved aside, revealing a small hidden chamber beyond. "Incredible," Hassan whispered. Harper's headlamp revealed a space just large enough for a person to stand in. Unlike the rest of the tomb, this chamber contained no artifacts or inscriptions, except for a single stone pedestal in the center, upon which rested a metal box about the size of a small briefcase. Harper approached cautiously, aware that this hidden room might contain traps, but nothing happened as he reached the pedestal and examined the box. It was made of the same non-corroding metal as the other artifacts, with no visible hinges or locks. The top surface was inscribed with symbols similar to those on the scrolls, and walls but arranged in a circular pattern. The disc, Harper realized suddenly. It's not just a calculation device, it's a key. He took out the metal disc and compared its markings to those on the box. There was a clear correspondence between certain symbols. Acting on instinct, he placed the disc on top of the box, aligning the symbols as best he could. When the final symbol clicked into place, a soft humming filled the small chamber. Lines of light similar to those in the wall began to trace the edges of the box, and with a soft click, the top panel split down the middle and slid open. Harper held his breath as he peered inside. The box contained a single object, what appeared to be a book, bound in the same leather-like material as the scrolls, but thicker and more elaborate. He lifted it carefully from the box. The cover bore no title, just a single symbol that matched, none he'd seen before. A spiral galaxy shape with a small dot positioned at a specific point within it. "What is it?" Hassan asked from the doorway of the small chamber. "I'm not sure," Harper replied, bringing the book out into the larger room where they had better light. "But I think it might be Amenhotep's most important record." He opened the book gently, afraid the ancient binding might crumble. But like everything else in the tomb, it was in remarkable condition, as if it had been created decades rather than millennia ago. The pages were filled with the hybrid writing system, part hieroglyphics, part unknown symbols, but scattered throughout were illustrations that made Harper's breath catch. Detailed diagrams of star systems, maps of what appeared to be planetary orbits, and drawings of devices far more complex than any ancient civilization should have been able to conceive. "This is impossible," he murmured, turning the pages carefully. "These are accurate depictions of star systems that weren't discovered until the 20th century. There's no way Amenhotep could have known this." As he reached the middle of the book, he found pages that made even less sense, diagrams of what looked like machines, mathematical equations using symbols he'd never seen before, and most strangely, drawings of people wearing what appeared to be suits with helmets, standing beside Egyptian figures. "What am I looking at?" he whispered, more to himself than to Hassan. The last pages of the book contained what seemed to be a narrative, written entirely in the hybrid language. Harper could only make out occasional phrases. They came from the stars. Shared knowledge. Return when the cycle completes. Hidden until humanity reaches the stars again. Harper sat back on his heels, his mind racing. This isn't just a record of astronomical observations, it's suggesting contact. That Amenhotep had knowledge from a non-Egyptian source. "You mean like from another country?" Hassan asked, looking confused. "No," Harper said slowly. "I think it's suggesting something much more extraordinary." Before he could elaborate, a voice spoke from the entrance to the inner chamber. "You're absolutely right, Dr. Harper." They both spun around. A woman stood in the doorway, tall with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing desert hiking clothes. She looked to be in her mid-30s, with intelligent eyes and an air of calm authority. "Who are you?" Harper demanded, instinctively clutching the book closer. "You're the one who's been watching us." She nodded. "My name is Dr. Layla Nassar. I've been observing your progress since you received the papyrus fragments." "You sent them," Harper realized. "Why? What is all this?" Layla stepped further into the chamber. "I'm part of a group that has protected this knowledge for generations. We are descendants of those who worked with Amenhotep, the last royal advisor, to know the whole truth." "What truth?" Harper asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. "That humanity has forgotten its true history," she replied. "That we were not alone in our development. That visitors came, not gods, but beings from another world, and shared knowledge with selected individuals." Hassan made a small, disbelieving sound, but Harper remained silent, thinking of the inexplicable artifacts, the advanced astronomical knowledge, the strange metal that didn't corrode. "Why reveal this now?" he finally asked. "And why to me?" "Because it's time," Layla said simply. "Our ancestors were told to keep this knowledge safe until humanity reached a certain level of development, until we began reaching for the stars, ourselves. As for why you..." She smiled slightly. "Your reputation for integrity precedes you. You're known for pursuing truth, regardless of how it might affect your career." Harper looked down at the book in his hands, then back at the remarkable chamber with its impossible artifacts. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on you," Layla replied. "You can take what you've found to your university, where it will likely be dismissed as a hoax or locked away for decades of study. Or you can work with us to prepare humanity for the truth, one step at a time." "And what truth is that exactly?" Harper asked, still skeptical despite everything he'd seen. "That we are not alone in the universe, that we never were, and that they will return, as promised to Amenhotep, once we've reached the necessary level of development." She gestured to the book. "It's all there, in the record you hold." Hassan looked between them nervously. "Dr. Harper, what is she talking about?" Harper didn't answer immediately. Instead, he carefully closed the ancient book and stood up slowly, his mind working through everything he'd seen and discovered over the past days. "I need time to think," he finally said. "This is a lot to process." Layla nodded. "Of course, but not too much time. Others would use this knowledge for power rather than enlightenment. That's why we've kept it hidden for so long." "Others? What others?" Harper asked sharply. "There have always been those who learned fragments of the truth. Throughout history, powerful people have sought the knowledge Amenhotep protected. We've stayed one step ahead, moving the artifacts when necessary, leaving just enough clues to keep the truth alive without revealing too much." She looked around the chamber. "This location has been safe for nearly a century, but now it's time to move again. That's why we needed someone like you, someone who could properly document everything before we relocate it." Harper looked at the remarkable room full of artifacts that shouldn't exist. "Where will you take all this?" "That depends on your decision," Layla said, "whether you choose to join us or go your own way." As the morning sun filtered through the entrance tunnel, casting long shadows across the ancient chamber, Harper stood at a crossroads, between the comfortable world of academic archaeology and a truth that would change humanity's understanding of its own history. The book in his hand seemed to grow heavier with the weight of its secrets. Behind him lay a lifetime of conventional research. Ahead, a journey into territory no historian had ever mapped. "I need to see proof," he said finally. "Real, incontrovertible proof, not just artifacts that could be explained away." Layla smiled, as if she'd been expecting this response. "That's exactly why we chose you, Dr. Harper. Come with me. There's something else I need to show you, something not even Amenhotep included in his records." As they prepared to leave the tomb, Hassan looked uncertainly between Harper and the mysterious woman who had appeared so suddenly in their expedition. "What about me?" he asked quietly. "I've seen all this too,